Hi, in this video we'll speak about the general overview of this repertoire. I'll try to explain what made me decide for my very specific choices in terms of the opening lines, as well as the general approach to this repertoire, to some systems, about some psychological nuances, about some memorization nuances, and so on. And we'll have a general overview at the systems I'm suggesting and at how they fit with each other. Let's start with the King's Indian defense and the Grunfeld, the G6 family, so to speak. So, and actually, before we do that, let me say a couple of other words about the first moves. So, obviously, we play d4. This is a d4 repertoire. But then, on the next move, we're gonna go knight to f3, pretty much regardless of what black does, unless he goes, let's say, c5 or, e5 or some crap like this. And sometimes we can play e4 too, but that's a different story. So, the thing is, I wanted to make this repertoire very positional and very classic. I tried to avoid memorization, and I tried to avoid dependence on the sharp lines. For example, imagine if you play with white versus a Nimzo, and you go in a line like this. Well, here, if you forget something in some super sharp line like say c5, d5, b5, you're done. You can lose as white in say 15 moves out of the opening without sometimes even realizing what you did wrong. And I'm not trying to immediately say this is bad. This is actually a perfect weapon for a certain category of players, such as professionals, who's got plenty of time to research, and find some interesting novelties, and try to squeeze every single drop of the advantage versus their seasoned opponents. However, I assume this will be the repertoire for club players and tournament players who are not doing chess full time, and if they are, then they have some other problems, or I mean not full time, but if they are even spending a lot of time on chess, believe me, you have many other things to work on. You've got to calculate, you've got to solve puzzles, you've got to analyze your games, you've got to fix the black repertoire and things like that. So you can't really afford to play such sharp lines. It's not possible. It's like a person who makes, I don't know, 50,000 a year taking a mortgage for $1 million. Not doable. This is not smart. So, moving on. Or let's say if you were to, meet the King's Indian or meet Grunfeld, yeah, sure, you can do it with such a sharp system as f3, but again, you forget one move and you're done. This is against my philosophy of what the club players should be doing for the long-term growth. So we're gonna play knight to f3 pretty much regardless whether it's d5 or knight f6. Now, when it comes to facing the Benoni, Benoni too actually, but now we're speaking of Grunfeld and King's Indian. When it comes to facing those lines, it's, I think, absolutely fair and reasonable to say that most black players going for them are looking to smash you off the board. They're going to crush you. They're looking to attack to get counterplay and counter chances. And while it's possible to play principled chess, I tried to rather strive for a small positional advantage with a clear plan, clear way of trying to get some pressure. So, for example, after c4, bishop g7, knight c3, I've tried to first of all actually fit our choices very well. So after both d6 and d5, we are going to play the identical move, which is both here and here, bishop to g5. This line, I think, is very sensible in that regard that it immediately looks to constrain opponent's counter chances. In the King's Indian too, while it's possible and it's definitely most ambitious to go for the very main lines, I didn't feel like ever having you mated in, say, variations like this in the very classical King's Indian, and I definitely think that, let's say, well, this is probably the most, objectively ambitious path to the advantage. Black's winning a bunch of games with all those very classic attacks on the king side, and you can research it if you want, but I think as a white player, you should be typically looking to put pressure on your opponent without much risk and without burning all the bridges. So I was looking for a more positional approach, which I thought would be bishop to g5 here as well. This system is not very well researched. The system does have a lot of subtleties though, nice positional as well as tactical traps, and I think black actually has to play very carefully here. And also what's very important is that, unlike in most systems in the King's Indian, black is very, very limited in terms of counterplay, he can't get nearly as much. So we're looking to simply, limit black's possibilities. And I actually think that the system has a lot of poison to it. Then, moving on to the positions after, to the, so to speak, e6 and d5 family. Such positions as, e6, followed by Queen's Gambit, or followed by, let's say, the Queen's Indian. Here, it will be a slightly different approach. So, black can try to play d5, followed by e6 later, or he can try to play, let's say, e6 here. In either case, what I'm looking to recommend is sticking to the approach with the move e3 in it. For example, after d5, c4, e6, we'll play the very quiet system with e3. Why so? Well, if you were to play the Nimzo instead, starting with c4 and knight c3 on move 2 and move 3, if you were to look here, then you'll need to have a bunch of very good suggestions, both versus the actual Nimzo as well as in some very sharp lines, such as, say, pawn to c5, the actual Benoni. It gets very sharp and complicated, albeit white is better. But when we start with the move knight f3, and after d5 we go c4, and after e6 we play e3, we don't allow for such systems as Rogozin, or Semislav, or the Vienna game, or the Semi-Tarash. I objectively would need, probably 10 or 15 minutes to even just show you the very first moves of those lines. And if we were to just talk about them, it'll take us hours and hours. And if I were to just try to cover, say, this position after the move knight c3, I guess for a good repertoire we'll need like another 10 hours, which I don't think is a very practical thing to do. So, we'll stick to this move e3. And in fact, while it might seem very calm and quiet and unambitious, it's got plenty of poison to it, as I keep explaining. This is a very practical system, which we can use both versus the Queen's Gambit, as well as versus the Queen's Indian, after e6, c4, b6, e3. And in fact, I think white, while he is clearly not, looking for the maximum advantage, he keeps a board full of pieces, and he can definitely try to outplay the opponent based on the very standard, typical plans that we are discussing in the course. We keep every single piece and most pawns on the board. We play a very long-term, slow strategic play, which I'm myself good at and best at, when it comes to comparing with my other skills as a player, and which I think I'm best at explaining and teaching. So you've definitely got the right presenter here to explain this sort of positions. And in fact, for example, the Queen's Gambit with e3 after d5 e3 has been played by very many top level players, such as, let's say, Artemiev. And clearly you cannot say that this guy is, has no ambitions. But at the same time, it's clear that such a player as Artemiev, while he's a top player, he is, a top 10 player, he's European champion and so on, one of the best players in the world in Blitz and Rapid. He is clearly very smart and practical about his time when it comes to investing time in the openings. He's not looking for the sharpest lines. He's looking to show his chess skill to his opponents. And this is exactly the way to go. Then, I'm also recommending the approach with e3, as you might guess, in the Queen's Gambit accepted, simply because, let's say here, even black could get the Queen's Gambit accepted with dc4. And of course, if it comes to, let's say, d4, d5, c4, dc, well, we'll also play e3. This is a very quiet system too, but make no mistakes, it's very poisonous, and we've got plenty of positional approaches as well as actually some attacking ones. Interestingly, it's exactly in the Queen's Gambit accepted where I'm going for some very ambitious and attacking lines. And against the Slav, which is another super solid opening of the same family, the light squared family, as I call it, the light square approach to the central fight, I recommend the very interesting and rare yet ambitious system with knight to d2. In fact, this is very similar to, let's say, the line with e3. However, it does not allow for some systems, and I think that it actually also is a very practical choice, and yet we definitely have great chances of playing for the advantage. Such players as So, Mamedjarov, Ipatov, Rapport, Jabava have placed their foot on the slant of the move knight to d2, which I definitely think shows that it has some bite to it, and we spent a little bit of time covering the Slav. just again, if you were to play, let's say, the e3 Slav, you'd need to know the Chebanyan, because the systems with bishop f5, with bishop g4, with e6, with g6, and in fact, after say, g6, or after say e6, chances are we'll transpose to our repertoire with knight d2, but we avoid some of the most unpleasant systems, such as the move bishop f5 in this position. So this is very good, I think, and very practical. Now, moving on to the to some of the less popular defenses. Black can also try, of course, the Benoni with c5, but after d5, e6, we're not gonna put the pawn on c4. I have prepared some very interesting, again, slightly, slight sideline. In fact, it's a very popular move too. It's not that much of a sideline, but it's a very practical try, which is to go knight to c3. We keep the pawn on c2, and in fact, we're again looking for a slight positional pressure. And we apply the same approach, of course, as you might guess, versus the move d6. We place the knight on c3, keeping the pawn on c2, and we do the very same thing versus c5, d5, and say e5. We play knight c3 and e4. That is the most, in fact, I think, ambitious and precise approach to this very system. So such a, well, potentially dangerous and potentially counter-attacking weapon as a Benoni has been neutralized as well. We are not looking for the maximum edge. We're looking for a very comfortable position where the opponent has as little counterplay as possible. Now, some sidelines, or relatively as respectable openings, you might say, include the Dutch. Now, as for the Dutch, it's actually a very interesting thing, because initially I was super tempted to make such a choice as, say, knight to c3 or bishop to g5. I think those moves are excellent. Those moves, albeit they are theoretically sidelines, are, I think, in fact, maybe even objectively, better, or at least as good as the very main line with knight to f3 and g3. However, I've decided to recommend exactly knight f3, g3. You might wonder why. Well, the very serious issue with the move bishop g5, or the move knight c3, would be that if black were to start with the move e6, then we either need to go to the French defense, which is clearly not a part of a plan, or we need to play c4, which after knight f6 drives us out of our repertoire. For example, after knight f3, c5, this will be the Benoni or the Blumenfeld, which we definitely do not need. Or, well, what else can we do? I even have no idea what other moves are available. Like, we're not gonna play, let's say, knight c3 here. I mean, we can go knight f3, but then the main problem, as I said, is that f5 actually gets us a stone wall where we can't anymore play that system to bishop to g5. So we would be out of our repertoire. And I definitely did not think that, as much as I like such systems as, say, knight c3 versus the actual Dutch, that just for the sake of getting to always play them, we would need to cover, let's say, the French. I mean, that would be very, very impractical, I think. So I've decided sticking to the very main fianchetto system versus the Dutch. Now, there are a couple other transpositions in 1d4 which could potentially actually drive the 1d4 player a little crazy, or at least annoy him a lot. Such moves include d6 and g6. The reason for that is because here, let's say if you play c4, then after e5 we can get out of our repertoire. If we play knight f3, then there are such systems as, say, bishop to g4 that need to be studied. Or say, after g6, for example, c4, bishop g7, knight c3, there are such lines as e5 or c5 or bishop g4, and many of them, or say knight c6, and many of them are not even good, but nevertheless, there's a lot of transposition-related work, and I've tried to keep things as practical and as simple as possible, so I definitely wanted to avoid doing that, and I definitely wanted to suggest an easier solution. So, after the move d6, as well as after the move g6, we're actually going to land on a slightly unfamiliar territory, because we will transpose to the actual perk, or the actual modern, or the actual, for example, Philidor. And you might be a little scared of that, because this might sound like an awful lot of work just in order to avoid a bunch of pesky sidelines, but I've managed to keep things extremely practical. In fact, I believe the videos, both about the perk and about, say, Philidor, don't run over 20 to 30 minutes, which is, super fast and super easy when it comes to covering an entire opening. I found some very, very practical weapons for us, guys, and I'm definitely happy with this transposition too. Now, what else do I need to mention? Well, after d4, what else is there? I guess that is pretty much it. I mean, black can obviously try, some very, very ridiculous moves, such as, say, one b6, or, for example, e6, and after, say, knight f3, b6, but that's not a problem either. We obviously get a very comfortable position easily. One more thing is that after d5, actually this is one more important thing to bring up. So if we were to play d4, knight f6, c4, then we'll need to know a lot of gambits, such as, for example, the Banco, or such as, for example, the Budapest. And the move order knight to f3, both here, as well as in the position after d5, avoids plenty of gambits, because say if d5, c4, then black could try such stuff as e5, the Albin counter gambit, knight to c6, the Chigorin defense, and maybe such lines as, for example, e6 and say knight c3, c5, some counter gambit in the Tarrasch defense, when after taking this Sharaganiga system where he plays cd4, cd4. And also lines are, again, lead to the white advantage, but they're highly, I think, highly complicated sometimes. White needs to know quite a bit, or else he can even lose quickly. And that is definitely not something many players want. In fact, I can even tell you a little story, which I think many of you would recognize yourself in. So, in fact, I had one student who has been a great guy, very interested, very motivated. However, he's been working full-time, he's a very busy person, and he's been only playing chess a bunch, not that much. He doesn't have that much time to study, but he wants to learn more things. I mean, there are many of you who feel exactly the same way. And, in fact, we've had a lot of success with one d4. For example, he's been very successful versus the King's Indian, or the Queen's Gambit declined, or the Slav. But one huge headache we've had is that once in a while, some random soul would throw such a move as e5 at him, or, for example, some Banco Gambit at him, and in fact, the problem was that while I would explain to him what to do in those lines, and I was a relatively inexperienced coach back then. I mean, I was already teaching for a while, but now, obviously, that my coaching experience has amassed thousands and thousands of hours, I know a lot more how to approach the, opening choices with students of all sorts. But back then, what I would do, I would show to him some system, which obviously would not be the most theoretical one. Well, still, it would involve a little bit of learning. But the problem is because such openings are so rare, like you see them once or twice in 100 games, by the time he'd get it again, because he doesn't play that much either, he would forget what we looked at. And then this would happen again and again, and I guess you might recognize yourself in this video if you're watching it, even though I think many people actually have, faced such problems. Well, we've had a pretty hard time figuring out what to do. So then eventually I've just told him, okay, we need to change our repertoire a little bit. We'll start with the move knight f3, whether black plays d5 or knight to f6. And in fact, it turned out that in most systems, such as, let's say, the Slav or Queen's Gambit, it doesn't really matter. At least for our repertoire with him it didn't matter, or King's Indian. The only thing is that he couldn't play the Nimzo as white anymore, but that wasn't a huge loss. And as a result, his performance just skyrocketed. Because while you might say, okay, you just told me one game in 100, doesn't count for much. But if you think of 5 sidelines or 10 sidelines, which you see in, every 10th game, in fact, obviously, if you score like an extra half a point out of 10, or an extra point out of 10, well, your rating will be 100 points higher. This is just math. So his rating skyrocketed. Not because we did an extensive, amount of some new unrelated, like endgame work or something, even though we did that too, but because he just became a lot more practical with his opening choices. It took me, unfortunately, a while to figure it out, because, as I said, I didn't have as much experience back then, that for a, club player, it could be a bit difficult to deal with those sidelines, but now I'm very well aware of this. So the repertoire I've presented here is super practical, and it's geared at players who want to keep things simple, who want to navigate through their games based on the typical middle game positions, on the typical structures, on the typical plans, and so on and so forth, who want to play according to the plan, to the system, to the structure, who don't want to memorize and base their entire game plan on the very specific sequence of moves, which can definitely, either be forgotten or be refuted, or some new improvement could be found. And for people who don't have that much time to follow and you know, try to track the daily developments of the top-notch last-minute theory. I hope with this presentation I've managed to clarify a little bit, first, what you can expect from this course, and secondly, what my choices are generally and why they are such exactly and not some other ones. Obviously, there could have been, some other systems I could have suggested instead, which would have also fit my goal, but I'm very happy with all those choices I've just showed to you and all the choices I've presented in the actual course when we come to discussing some very specific variations. Thank you for watching, and I hope this repertoire will bring you plenty of success. First off, I of course hope it would serve its very main goal, which is to make your opening choices better. But also I think that because we concentrate so much on the middle games, because I quote so many high-level games which show some model ideas, it will make you a better player overall. And also, it's very important that because of this move knight f3, I think the repertoire also suits people who don't look to rebuild their opening systems completely, but who are ready to, let's say, play knight f3 or 1c4 and pick only some of the systems I am suggesting while not changing their entire repertoire. I hope this clarifies the situation and makes you understand what to expect extremely well. Thank you for watching, and now I cannot wait to have you watch the main videos. I've put a lot of work in them, and I definitely hope you would appreciate and enjoy them. Thank you for watching, and take care. I'll see you shortly in the actual course.